Leaders from Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa are seeking to develop deeper trade and economic ties. The BRICS bloc of emerging world economies is holding its 15th summit in Johannesburg, South Africa from August 22nd to 24. Here's a look at the key focus areas at this year's summit.
This is the first time BRICS leaders are gathering since the COVID-19 pandemic hit. But the summit will be marked by the absence of Russian President Vladimir Putin, who is participating remotely. The summit is expected to cover a wide range of issues. One of the key topics is the expansion of the group, as 40 countries have shown interest.
Them coming to the table with us will only strengthen the South-to-South cooperation that we need for a sustainable future. So I'm absolutely delighted that the countries have come knocking at the BRICS doors rather than us having to go to them.
BRICS members will also discuss cross-border trade in local currencies to reduce dependency on the US dollar. Altogether, the 5 member nations account for more than 40% of the world's population, and their combined GDP is more than 26% of the global economy.
The BRICS mechanism has the potential to become a crucial organization in determining global development. Its potential lies not only in the economy, but also in the various initiatives it promotes. In my view, the BRICS countries are ready to set a reform agenda for the current global economic order.
Promoting settlement in local currencies is a big issue that will be discussed during the summit. BRICS has emphasized financial cooperation since its establishment and has promoted the reform of the World Bank and IMF, as well as establishing the new development bank. BRICS opposes the hegemony of the US dollar and pursues the reform of the global financial system.
Experts say the summit is a major opportunity for BRICS leaders to counter Western dominance around the world. Bureau Report, ddindia.
Ahead of the summit, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has said with the upcoming BRICS summit, he intends to create positive opportunities for not only South Africa, but for the African continent at large. Isabel Nakaria reports on this.
South Africa President Cyril Ramaphosa says the BRICS summit will present opportunities for Africa. The BRICS countries make up one of the world's biggest economic blocs, representing a quarter of the global economy. President Ramaphosa is pushing for Africa to partner with the bloc and strengthen investment and economic ties. Johannesburg says it supports the expansion of the BRICS, though it's a matter that requires the concession of all members.
The value of BRICS extends beyond the interests of its current members. For its efforts to be effective, BRICS needs to build partnerships with other countries that share its aspirations and perspectives.
Several countries have already expressed interest, and more than 20 have formally applied to join BRICS. President Ramaphosa says there are huge financial opportunities that Africa can gain from the new BRICS Bank. The BRICS Bank has financed multi-billion-dollar projects in South Africa, including clean energy, water infrastructure, and greenhouse gas emission reduction. Isabel Nakaria in Johannesburg, reporting for ddindia.
Continuing the big coverage of BRICS summit here at ddindia, correspondent Amritpal Singh speaks to South African Trade and Industry Minister Ibrahim Patel. He said that South Africa expects that BRICS summit will play an important role in bringing investment from big economies like India and China.
As all is set for the 15th BRICS summit to be held in Johannesburg here in South Africa, the BRICS, which was primarily an economic grouping when it began, now has further diversified into other areas of political partnership. It has a security aspect to it, but economics and trade, especially in the given scenario, remains at the heart of the conversation between the leaders when they meet for the Leaders Summit. I have with me Ibrahim Patel. He is the Minister for Trade, Industry and Competition of South Africa. Minister Patel, as we stand here in Johannesburg on the eve of the 15th BRICS Summit, what is on the top of your mind when the leaders come and meet? What would be the most important thing they would be discussing?
Without any question, economics, commerce, trade, how to deepen the opportunities to grow the economy. South Africa and the other four BRICS countries want to create more opportunities for jobs, for young people, for small businesses, provide more opportunities for consumers, and that is what BRICS represent, an opportunity to do all of that. Two-way trade between South Africa and India is approximately $20 billion US, and we think we can do more. And we can do more with each of the BRICS countries. South Africa is a gateway to the African continent. It's a continent of 1.3 billion people. It's a continent with vast resources of minerals. It's the food basket for the world, and Africa's moment has come. So there's opportunities for BRICS investors, China, India, and the other countries to come and invest inside South Africa in manufacturing pharmaceutical products, being able to have productive services, digital services and others produced here for the African market and for the rest of the world.
Also, the BRICS is a grouping primarily of developing countries, given that today they control contribute about 31% of the global GDP. But in terms of trade, do you think in terms of global trade that these countries need to cooperate more, and on what lines can they work on to take their share in the global trade to a higher relationship?
There are two important responsibilities that BRICS countries have. The first is to protect the global trading system, to keep it a system that is open, a system in which countries and nations trade with each other, and that we don't get the world to divide into two or more camps. Trade and investment must flow because they bring benefits to humanity. The second responsibility that we have as BRICS countries is to find opportunities to increase the level of trade, but also the composition of trade.
Coming more from Johannesburg, India's BRICS Sherpa Damu Ravi talked with our ddindia correspondent Shubhendu Ghosh exclusively, where he mentioned about Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's priorities during the BRICS summit. Let's listen in.
Johannesburg in South Africa is all set to host the 15th BRICS summit. I have with me Mr. Damu Ravi, India's BRICS Sherpa. Welcome to ddindia, sir.
Thank
you. This is the first in-person leader summit after the pandemic. How does that raise the expectations, and what is new in this edition of BRICS Summit?
All the leaders to meet in person in this important event. South African leadership, particularly the President, has done enormous work.
If you could take us through India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi's priorities in this edition of the BRICS Summit.
Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi has given a strong pitch for the development and the development dimension of the global discourse today. I think it dates back to the time when January earlier this year he hosted the Global South Summit, in which about 125 countries' leaders have participated. I think taking off from there, the deliberations within India's presidency of the G20 and the BRICS, there is a synergy developing, particularly the narrative on development coming from the developing countries' perspective, from the global south, and how we need to develop that perspective and put it in the right way of understanding the women-led development, the food security, bringing in millets into the context, and the lifestyle for environment when you talk about climate change and energy. These are the important dimensions that are being discussed, and thankfully, there is a lot of synergy within the BRICS discussions. So all of this are going to be captured in the Johannesburg Declaration that will come out at the end of the BRICS Summit. I think the focus here today is to do projects in the developing world using the New Development Bank resources and the technologies and the innovation that is happening in the BRICS countries. That's been very well brought out in the roadmap for economic cooperation among the BRICS countries. So eventually, gradually, these programs are being implemented in the BRICS countries, and Africa becomes a very priority country for all of us.
Delhi Prime Minister Narendra Modi speaks about the priorities of the global south in every international platform. How will the BRICS summit also form a very, very important place to engage with those ideas for him?
Yes, I think some of the low-cost solutions that India has successfully introduced can be brought into the global south. I think one of which we've already discussed about the digital platform, the digital public goods is a very important enabler for development. And the second most important is the currency being discussed in the BRICS context right now. So again, Prime Minister has emphasized a lot on the doing trading in INR, so national currencies. So that's become now a priority item in the BRICS groups. And there'll be a more concrete action plan in the days ahead as to how to introduce it. So the global south and the BRICS fits in very well. And also we need to think that what are the success of the BRICS under the South Africa chairship will have its own positive impact into the India's G20 presidency. So because you have to understand all the BRICS countries are also members of the G20. So we can create that kind of a close understanding on the global south issues and challenges.
Thank you very much for speaking with ddindia. That was India's BRIC Sherpa Damu Ravi talking about the key themes in this edition of the BRIC Summit and India's priority at this global engagement. With camera person Ankit Rawat, Shubhendu Ghosh in Johannesburg for ddindia.
All right, to spell out more on this, we're joined in by our correspondent Amrit Pal Singh. Amrit, this is for the first time that the BRICS leaders will be meeting in person after the COVID pandemic. Let us understand more from you about India's priorities at the summit.
Well, good morning to you. It's still night here in Johannesburg as we are slightly west of India. But we're talking about the priorities of India. It's very clearly that India would be pushing for the agenda of the global south. Remember, BRICS is a grouping of emerging or developing economies, and the concerns, priorities, aspirations of the global south form a key priority of India's G20 presidency. So the Prime Minister, in his intervention at the BRICS Leaders Summit, is likely to bring this up prominently and push for greater cooperation amongst the developing countries, amongst the emerging economies, amongst what is referred to as the global south, for completion of a more inclusive, a more fair, a more equitable world order. Apart from that, the Prime Minister could also raise the issue of climate change through innovative measures like life or lifestyle for environment, a development which is more inclusive, especially is women-led. Also, apart from that, we could see the Prime Minister's intervention touch upon the need for moving towards trading in local currencies, and there could be talk about a common currency in the BRICS, though there may not be announcements on that, but yes, surely there will be work to further this agenda.
All right, Amrit, could the expansion of BRICS also figure prominently, and also what kind of headway could we see being made on this?
Yes, expansion of the BRICS it would figure prominently here. As you know, many countries, over 100 countries, have expressed their interest in joining the BRICS grouping. India, per se, in principle, wants that, is open to expansion, especially of the global south. As you know, at this summit, over 70 countries have been invited, and mostly from the global south. Many countries from the African continent, many countries from the South American continent, countries like the UAE, Saudi Arabia, countries like Iran, Indonesia, who have expressed interest to join the BRICS. So India in principle is open to that. Other countries of the BRICS grouping seem amenable to this idea, but you know, we could expect no major announcements could be expected at this particular conference, because as you know, BRICS is a consensus-based organization declaration. So the Johannesburg declaration could see, draft resolutions being moved for what should be the criteria for admitting countries here, what are the guidelines that should be adopted for admitting newer countries into the grouping and expanding the base of the developing and the emerging economies around the world, so that the global architecture, both the governance architecture and the financial architecture, can be evolved in a manner that is more equitable and not just West-driven or not just driven by a select few. It is more broad-based.
All right, Amrit, we'll leave it here. Thank you for joining in with those inputs.